Good evening, goedenavond, bonsoir à tous. Mijn naam is Petrus Kemme. On behalf of the Vlaams Architectuurinstituut, I would like to thank you for joining us for tonight's lecture in the Across lecture series. Across is a collaboration between A+ Architecture in Belgium, the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Liège, and the Vlaams Architectuurinstituut. And in this series we try to cross a few borders in architectural discourse. First and foremost, we want to cross a linguistic border between the two linguistic regions in Belgium. So we invite young practices to give lectures on the other side of the linguistic border. So usually we invite French-speaking officers to come and give a lecture in the Single in Antwerp, and Flemish architects are asked to give a lecture in Liège. Unfortunately, due to the circumstances surrounding COVID-19, we cannot do this in the usual setting in a room full of people at the Single in Antwerp, but we have taken this as an opportunity to visit the offices and to stream the lectures live from their home base. So tonight we are streaming to you from Brussels, Schaerbeek, which is home to tonight's lecturers. I forgot to mention the second border we cross across, which is a generational border. And so therefore we always ask an established architect in the region in which the lecture is held to introduce the office and to speak with them and to get to know them and then give a short introduction. So tonight we have the pleasure of having Yves Malysse of URA, Yves Malysse Kiki Verbeek, to introduce VVV. URA is well known, has been working on an exhibition that unfortunately had to be delayed due to COVID, but the publication is ready and more information on that can be found on the website of A+. So tonight's office is VVV, which is founded by Guillaume Van Este and Nicolas Villeneuve. And on their website, it's quite striking immediately that the name of their office is immediately followed up by a subtitle that already expresses the scope of their work, architecture and urbanism. And so, indeed, the projects that we find in their portfolio range from renovations of apartments up to public spaces and master plans. But what is striking is that all of these projects on every scale are deeply embedded with a consciousness of both scales, of both the large scale and the small scale. So, but I will let Yves Malysse do the proper introduction. But before that, I would like to thank the Flemish government, La Fédération Bruxelles-Wallonie, and the Brussels Capital Region, as well as Dieter and Imo for their support for this lecture series. And with that, I give the floor to Yves Malysse to introduce VVV.
Hello and good evening. My name is Yves Malysse, architect from URA, Yves Malysse Kiki Verbeek Architectural Office based in Brussels. And I'm delighted to present you tonight the lecture of VVV Architecten. I met VVV on several occasions during the last couple of weeks, and I have to say it was always a very diverse and very nice conversations we had during this moments. Although we are different generations, there's a lot of things that we have in common. We spoke a lot about big things, small things, about architecture, about life, and it seems that the two main architects from VVV, Nicolas and Guillaume, are quite different, but also quite the same. They are ambitious, they are eager, they are willing to work hard, and I have to say their open perspective on projects seems very interesting. Yeah, I can tell you some anecdotes. I won't take too much time. I think it's their evening and they should enjoy their moments. But that's also what I told them, to enjoy this moment in their short career, but I think they have a long career in the future. I believe very much in them. I think there were some small anecdotes that keep popping up in my mind when I think about our conversations. And yeah, there's this, like I said, this willingness to work hard, but also to work on sometimes less visible actions, things that for us or maybe not so important, but they have a sharp yeah, perspective on things. They see small things and they are willing and able to turn these things into something significant. One of the nicest examples I see is a very small interaction that they are doing in their project Maison de Village, a private house, nice private house in Serfontaine, so below Brussels, where they have the intention to, because the house has just been finished this year, they have the intention to add something quite specific and quite nice. They will add during spring, and I hope at that moment we are all able to visit and the house and the small project. They are willing to place 2 benches along the sideline of the parcel. And this shows for me a lot of things. It's a small intervention, but it shows a lot of things. It shows their ability to think about public life in even private, very private conditions. It shows their interests and their idea to make small things big and to make it into kind of happening, into kind of event. So these small benches will be placed on the upper point and on the lower point of the parcel. So on the edge of the streets and on the edge of the parcel in the valley. So it will be a nice promenade and a nice encounter on 2 places to meet your neighbors, to have a kind of sudden meeting with people passing by, or have a meeting with the people who are living there. And this is quite significant, quite characteristic for their way of thinking. They are both very different. They have a different background, they have a different career, while the first person or the one person is more maybe urbanistic and has a bigger view on things. The other one, and I especially don't mention the names, so I think it's very important that they are complementary, but they also can interact both on all these scales, while the other architect has a very good view on detailing, on materialization, and I think that's the strength and the necessity of architectural offices today, that they are diverse, that they are able to pick up different scales and that are able to play with it. And I think it's very important to not be limited by some scales or some expertise, but to open your perspective towards a lot of things. And I see, and I'm really looking forward to see much more of VVV in the near future. I want to see this crossover of scales, of expertises along their path. And I think, of course, we also have Brussels in common, the city where we both work and live in, where we develop our projects. I think it's a fantastic city to live in and to work in, and I think they also see, for example, in their project, the pocket parks that they're now executing in Laken, I think, you see their talents and their way of dealing with maybe sometimes forgotten places, but putting them on a kind of a stage. Not by being spectacular, but by being very modest and by changing some small elements. I think they are able to make all of these things together in smaller and bigger projects. So I want you to enjoy the lecture. I say good luck to Nicolas and Guillaume with the lecture. Enjoy the lecture, enjoy this moment, and let's see further on in the very near future how you will do. And okay, good evening to everybody. Of course, I want to thank VAI and the A+ magazine and also the University of Liège for this opportunity. I like it a lot to be in contact with different architects, different generations. It has learned also me and us a lot about how we are working at this moment, and it gave also kind of a flashback to the beginning of our career. So good luck to everybody, good evening to everybody, and enjoy the lecture. Bye.
So hello everyone, we are very happy to welcome you. This is Nicolas and I am Guillaume, and we are really happy to participate to this exercise of ACROS and to share with you some of the project of the office VVV Architecture and Urbanism. Of course, we are very sad to have to do it through the distance and not in Antwerp in the single, but it gives us, in any case, the opportunity to present you our work, but also for us just to reflect on it.
We would like to thank very much the VAI, Liège and A+ for this organization of this conference and to giving us the opportunity to speak tonight. We also like to thank Kiki and Verbeek and Yves Malysse from URA for the very warmly welcome. We opened really, like Yves said, a very nice and sympathetic and generous dialogue with them and with Yves. We found it very pleasant to have these different meetings, en dus hartelijk bedankt van ons naar Kiki en Yves. This short lecture, sorry, is not a guided tour, but it's the exploration of 4 projects, built and unbuilt, and we would like to slightly meander throughout the territories of our practice. Just like we would meander in the landscape of a city and try to find some nice places and panorama across the journey. In this wandering, each project is a small utopia, an ideal island from where to get lost in the constellation of our approaches. Wandering from one project to another is also a walk between cities and scale, large landscape or density, space ideas or materialization of a detail, and simply within the work we do as a young and small office. We begin our journey with the project of the 4 pocket parks in Laken. The 4 pocket parks are 4 public spaces reclaimed from the edges of the city and from the leftovers of infrastructure, in this case the railway. The project involves a lot of different actors: the city, the park services, Infrabel, SNCB, inhabitants, which made it a very slow and complex story since we won the competition in 2015. The construction only started recently. We nonetheless take this slow process as an opportunity, and the project became like a guideline or reference within our practice, helping us reflecting on in other situations, a sort of living laboratory. We tested different ways of working, learned how to deal with participative process, public clients, and collaboration with variable geometries. The project is strongly influenced by this experimental posture and the input of different partners, a task force made of architects, landscape architects, urbanists and sociologists, namely Bloc Paysage, Louise Lefebvre, Pauline Cabrit, Pauline Varlotto and Margot Ville. The 4 sites lie in the northwest part of Brussels, between the canal, the Royal Park and the Boxtal public space. They are located along the L50 railway, crossing here from east to the west. It is being carried out in the framework of the Sustainable Neighborhood Contracts, Contrat de Quartier Durable, an urban renewal policy in the region of Brussels. The Commission was to renovate these leftover spaces located on the backside and to design small parks and open spaces for the neighborhoods, involving a participation process with the inhabitants. At the start, we discover wonderful places of tiers paysage, abandoned places full of poetry. We literally wandered across them to understand what are these spaces and what they are made of. By doing so, at the manor of Robert Smithson in Passaic, where we found residues of human activities as monuments in a landscape, we unfolded many existing layers. Layers of matters, objects, infrastructure. Some of these layers. A place that is non-accessible, along the streets. There is though a feeling of a larger perspective coming from the railway. Another place, a platform that ends nowhere, the back facade of Brussels row houses. They are all leading to a pack of lush vegetation, a wild atmosphere, a sort of urban refuge. Remains of the old railway track emerging like ruins from a dense and diverse vegetation. We found different sorts of elements, objects that are still in good condition, elements that structure the space, places with a strong atmosphere, or former uses that disappeared. As these places were unknown to the local citizen, a first action in our process was to make this space visible, which we did as collective workshops with inhabitants. This gave the opportunity to everyone to have a first encounter with the sites and to give us first inputs about the future designs. A strong motivation during the participatory process has been to concentrate as much as possible on what was already there, in terms of human resources, material, and reuse. Among the experiments we did, we organized a participative construction, creating a common space for the neighborhood, managed by its inhabitants. We also literally experiment new ways of maintaining these parks, with sheep eating the grass and the vegetation. On the long term, the sustainability of this type of landscapes project is partly linked to the appropriation by its inhabitants. These small parks, as experimental places, have the ability to host different initiatives carried by a local group of citizens. They could be thought of some sort of spatial or social resources at the disposal of the inhabitants. The pocket park could therefore become new commons. Through these interventions with the inhabitants, we started to develop visions, ideals, imaginaries on what could these pocket parks be. Like stepping stone, they participate at their own level in search for local, territorial and social link. They operate both as small neighborhood open spaces and as parks inscribed in a continuity at the scale of the metropolis, connected by the railway and a future bike path. The C28, which actually is a competition going on right now, and we are participating in this competition. 4 visions are proposed, like a framework with simple principles and different appropriable uses. We name these spaces to make them exist. We make a small tour now of these 4 spaces. The first, La Terrasse, is an urban belvedere and offers a future threshold for new housing building and a bike repair shop. It is an invitation to go down at the level of the railway, where playgrounds are disposed along an extension of the existing station platform. It is probably the most intense site since it's located above 2 underground trains and a metro station. Le Vallon is a place immersed in a dense green bank along the railway infrastructure, offering far-reaching perspective over a urban panorama. It is a hidden world behind branches, offering quietness and isolation. Le Jardin Station is the experimental garden of the district. It is the headquarters of the activities, communication, workshops for and with the neighbors. And finally, La Halte, a meadow along the former rail station, facing the canal and the district's gateway to the city. Since the construction of this last pocket park is now ending, we give it some more words to better understand our intervention. So the site followed the same condition than the other. It is located along the railway on a former track, which is still visible by the now demolished bridge. Being on an upper level, it was not connected to the streets. It has also some specific characteristics. It is close to the canal, on the most potential metropolitan public space of Brussels, and it is facing the former rail station of the King. We see here some images of the station. So he used the station as a direct entrance to his personal park and houses. So, but on the site, we also found quite a nice object, a little concrete railway shelter as a remain of this bigger station. So we see now the axonometry of our intervention, as well as the model. So we carried simple actions to renovate this site. The space is connected to the street level with a sloped ramp and a staircase, with the entrance, the main entrance of the park, on the canal. 2 belvederes at each side of the sites are placed on the former railway track walls, allowing views on the canal and on the city. In between, a meadow is installed as a place to sit, to gather, to dance, to wander, or to play. The former shelter becomes a small monument to the park, a kiosk on a small talus with a new folded roof. We also already envisioned the future connection with the bike route on the former demolished railway bridge, which you can see at the end of the model here. The building construction is now ending, and we are quite happy to give you some first pictures of the pocket park. Here is the kiosk on the bank, with places to sit, relax, and games for the children to play. A look on the belvedere facing the canal, and also another place to sit and relax. The other belvedere as a viewpoint on the neighbors. This space will be soon opening to the public, and we are really looking forward to see how inhabitants will appropriate the site. We hope, with the help of the city, that the citizens will continue the local involvement they started within our small laboratory by experimenting different uses or appropriation of this open space. We go now to another neighborhood, but in a less dense situation for the project we just saw. So it's a house project in a small village, Serfontaine, in the south of Belgium. It is one of the first commission we got. So the program of a building of a new family house could seem quite banal and simple, but actually it revealed to be a very complex one for us. A reference we use to help us in this process of designing a house is the Sogden House by Allison and Peter Smithen. It embodies these questions about the archetype of a family house as an ordinary object and its relation with the surroundings. To quote the Sogden children, "Dad talked about how a house was much more difficult to design because it had to support every aspect of your life, from living and loving to eating and fighting. He believed houses were far harder to design than factories. He wanted the house to be a normal, ordinary house in terms of the materials that were used, but he was also very keen that it was a communal space where everyone could be together." This quote was echoing the client's request about this house, but also the context of the commission. The plot is located at the outskirts of a small rural village, on the top of a hill or ridge, along a street surrounded by forest and agricultural lands. From the street side, it looks like a kind of suburban condition. Common prefab houses, dense fences, cheap pavement material, nearly a car-oriented design. But the landscape from the plot is on the contrary very unique, a kind of picturesque landscape. The client is a retired couple who lived in a house without garden in the center of the nearby village. They asked to have a house that benefits from this beautiful landscape, but they didn't want to live too far away from the neighbors. The request was also to have a house that is functioning on only one level. In French we say de plein pied. And the house could also have the ability to host the children and the grandchildren on weekends. A house with a variable occupation in size. In that sense, there was also a desire from the client to live in communal spaces. Following this request, we decided to turn the house so that it can enjoy as much as possible the surrounding landscape, the view on the neighbors, as well as the sun's path. The larger facade is therefore oriented south, and the house opens itself towards the streets and the view, creating a space between the landscape and the same street. The garden, oriented south, is organized along a small private path that connects a bench on the street to a vegetable garden, a terrace, and a grove at the end of the plot with another bench. We keep the views from the street and the facing house to the landscape intact as a politeness to the neighborhood. On the north side, a paved path connects the street to the main entrance in the center of the house. By doing so, we enable a plan that distributes the entrance hall in the middle and arrange the very private space on one side and the more public or common on the other, bedroom to the east and sitting room to the west. In between the spaces, the plan is organized with alternate enclosed servant rooms that allow the house to function: garage, bathroom, laundry, and kitchen. The main spaces slides along these rooms, opening perspectives, enfilade, diagonal views, and intimate relation with the surrounding landscapes. Still, we kept a very practical aspect of domestic situation, with, for instance, direct connection from the garage to the kitchen. These spaces are set under one big roof that also reinforce this feeling of different atmospheres, from common to more intimated spaces. We see here the double height in the dining room, visually connecting the first level dedicated to the children. We now take a small tour in the finished building. So we were able to do that thanks to the extensive shooting made by the photographer Séverin Malo. As seen from the street, the facade is ordinary, referring to the direct context of the other houses. It has the same kind of volume or proportion, but a path leading to the entrance is like an invitation to go further, while the kitchen bow window is used as a way to welcome the guest. To connect even more the facade of the house with its surrounding, we found some interesting reference in the village itself. Vernacular houses, built from bricks and stones from different sizes, which were all clad with a white band or chalk to give them an apparent uniformity. The brick itself is a very expressive material, as shown is this very beautiful modernist architecture for Alto and Leverens. The brick here is no more structural, it has an insulation. But we used it with different uses of patterns that let guess what's inside the house. The servant rooms, volumes, or maybe the different floors. To be honest, the contractor got a bit mad with all these patterns, but he finally did a very nice and great job. These different patterns reflect this research of an object between an ordinary greater context and something very particular. We enter in the main hall in the middle of the house. The aim with the material used was to give a sense of continuous space and small articulations between these spaces. Here, the light coming from the roof and the two steps both inviting to the upper level. The roof and the inner walls create the boundaries for living spaces with different heights. On the left, we have a glimpse of the winter garden, which was a specific request by the clients to have a space that could blur this limit between the inside and the outside. Once again, we found a very powerful reference by the Smithsons, the solar pavilion, with a very similar relation to the context in a place that is totally immersed in a preserved landscape. Here, the brick cladding contributes in these blurry limits between the spaces. We now have a look into the more intimate spaces, also connected with the surroundings, the street in this case. We are maintaining the unity to the common spaces through use of the same floor material. On the contrary, we were willing to give a specific atmosphere to the so-called servant spaces, joyful colors, a common level with the cladding, for instance the tiles, in dialogue with the windows and therefore the views. Also here, a strong connection with the bath facing also the views and the landscape. In the kitchen, a high frieze serves as furniture, but also gives more domestic measure to a double height room. On the left, a hatch, a very practical connection with the dining room. The frieze go on along the room and enters in connection with the bow window facing the entrance. This unfolding continues its section to the first floor, where the roof is cut to let the light go in the center of the house, but also to give other views on the landscape. We see here a closer look of this roof, this cut. These enfilades of spaces and larger views inside the house continues on the first floor, with a different flooring that gives a playful atmosphere. A house on a hill, a house unfolding a hill. Its roofs add up two different references, one at the street level, the more ordinary one, and one on the landscape side, a peculiar one. An ordinary house on ordinary streets, an extraordinary garden as a communal space to the family, an extraordinary landscape as a communal place to the neighbors, a place to gather in the summer, or a place to sit and simply enjoy the sun and the view. Maybe finally we try to answer the complex question of building a house by adding some urban senses to this context.
So now we move on, still with the question of housing, but in a denser environment. So inhabiting the city, and in particular the dense city, today often means working with the existing, the renovation. So the existing walls, the existing bricks, the stock of matter, but also the existing structure of spaces. And in Brussels, we inherited some very sophisticated and beautiful typologies. Would it be the bourgeois house or the apartment housing block from the modernism? So they probably are the most common housing structure in the city, and therefore they are the most recurrent material condition inhabitants live in. But today the expectation of our times towards spaces quality, spaces flexibility, and spaces organization is changing, and it's changing rapidly. So in this context, some projects we realized, when you gather them together, they start to form a question of architecture. As architects, we develop projects within these existing structures, leading us to reinterpret these typologies at the light of the new ways of living. The urban fabric becomes then a breeding ground for typological reinterpretation. Working within the conceptual field of the types is also a posture on how to address these constant changes and reflect on how to reuse matters and spaces, structure to accommodate our living environment. Just like kitchens that becomes open, rooms made to do several things, shared space, outdoor spaces. And in this recurrent exercise of interpretation, some of our projects happen to be located on some anomalies in the city, on peculiar situations such as angles or distorted plots, offering then generous but complex conditions for the project. Just like this house in Saint-Gilles that was going to be very specific, both in its shape and in the way the owner was expecting to live in. So the house. The house is part of a set of 3 houses realized as a kind of real estate of operation at that time. A vertical circulation that distributes several high floors, most often arranged in a row of 2 or 3 rooms, from the street to the inner garden. The technical spaces were historically relegated to the backyard as annexed volumes, and this typology comes to define hermetic urban blocks, les îlots, l'intérieur d'îlot, strictly defining the public from the private with the front and the back facade. So these 3 houses were designed with standard plan and facades, which later during the construction could be adjusted to the taste of the client. The project we present tonight is located on the left house on the image. So this location on a corner of 2 streets distorts the plan and closes the angle between the 2 neighbors. It generates a complex relation between the house and the courtyard, making views to the distance narrow and vis-à-vis with neighbors intricated. On the front, on the contrary, so towards the streets, the staircase invades the free surface offered by the distortion, even taking advantage of a longer facade to open a window and have natural light in the staircase. So this is for the shape. Then the demand of the clients was to be able to live with elderly parents to help them while getting older, or later any other roommate if applicable, but to manage to live together both in an autonomous and collective way. So each floor was then designed and thought as a very autonomous part, almost intended as a tiny wing, as if it was a larger mansion. All the floors are being interrelated through this generous staircase that I presented just before. So let's have a quick tour inside those spaces. So this is the first floor, the communal spaces, a living room, and a kitchen extending to the inner courtyard with the view and the sun. The first apartment, a simple set of rooms, one floor, a bath, closet, and a winter garden, again extending towards the intérieur d'îlot, the inner courtyard. And then the second apartment, a small independent duplex under the roof. And a first consequence of this search of autonomy of the parts inside the house was to equip them lightly. A small shower, a stove, a kitchen, some techniques to connect to in the future, a partition wall that allows the lights and the view entering from the staircase. So not so many, but they are all small devices that we were very keen to reflect on, either detailing them very precisely or finding their right position in the house. A second decision of the project was to open each floor to a proper terrace, a balcony or a winter garden, so an outdoor room. Each small interior expanding then towards the light and the quietness of the courtyard. So adding an outdoor room augments the tiny spaces and reinforces the autonomy of those parts. This reversal towards the island and the opening towards the inner courtyard and the opening onto outside spaces is one of the repetitive topics found in many of our renovation projects. So it is also in this sense that the question of reinterpretation becomes a theme for us. And within the urban fabric, the house is located in a very difficult angle, so as I saw previously on the plan. And this combination of giving an exterior space and this specific geometric location came together as a synthesis in the question of the rear facade. Brussels houses are like Jane's divinity, two sides of the same coin. So today, new ways of living, but also mostly heritage status of the front facade, makes it possible for the project to address this back facade as an architectural whole. And the desire to offer outdoor spaces to everyone finds a sounding board in the need to manage complex geometries that comes from the anecdotes of the urban fabric. And indeed, while all the terraces turns towards the view, taking advantage of the Cornish situation on the Seine Valley, all these external spaces are then constructing the rear facade as an architectural form that takes in charge the irregular geometries, as you see on the plan. So each one addressing a wall, a folded roof, a volume, an annex. So the scale of action is a minor scale, it's just a small house, but the scale of resonance with which we enter into discussion and that we like to testify in our project is very broad. It brings the single element, a house, or the form of a house, in relation to the architecture of the city. So not far from that corniche, a bit lower actually on the topography of the Seine Valley, so still in Brussels, La Plaine Marie-Janson is another project. It's an existing open and public space in Saint-Gilles. It's a project we are developing in association with Studio Paola Vigano and with the support of ARA and BAS. So doing project of public space is a complex and beautiful work we are doing in the practice that crosses scales, encounters human practices, and that addresses the fundamentals of the project of the city as a collective construction, and literally as a common ground. Marie Janson is the most iconic public space we are working on today, but it's presented here tonight to uncover some of our broader reflection on other places about the project as a possibility to transform a place from its existing qualities. So back in the time, in the 70s, the site was still a large productive place, occupied by an industry where the Belgian coins were produced, actually. So the Munthof, l'Hôtel des Monnaies, which you see on the image. Like many other buildings in Brussels at that time, it was demolished with very few attention to its material or heritage value. Back then, after the demolition, a very simple and inexpensive layout was created as public space, a diamond-shaped pattern of cobblestones, a grid of trees on the same geometry, large surfaces of parking on the whole perimeter, isolating the heart of the void from the facade that surrounded it. Nevertheless, a new void appeared. And today we must admit that if we find many defects in this place, if materials are deteriorated on some areas, and if the practices of the space does not always go without conflicts, the so-called Carré de Moscou carries within him a very intrinsic, beautiful atmosphere. A sense of scale, the roughness of the pavement, the freshness and the shading of the trees. So for us, most of what constitutes the character of the place is already there. And this existing situation is a fascinating object of interest for us and became a theme of research. So coming back to urban scale, the resulting void after the demolition of the Munthof has also an unexpected consequence. It allows a series of of open spaces to form a system of park. So this new void of the Plaine Marie Janson completes a sequence of large open and public spaces that descend the slope. An almost continuous system of open spaces from le Parc de Forêt, Forest Park, to La Porte de Halle, Halpoort, the Halle Gate. So within this sequence, the Plaine Marie Janson is a pivotal point between the system of park and the Parvis, le Parvis de Saint-Gilles, an iconic place in the commune, welcoming a very intense and urban activity. So the transformation of this square is a possibility to design a shared space that affirms the capacity for a city to sustain strong ecological values within urban structures, addressing the fundamental climatic and societal challenges. For instance, on-site water management, rational treatment of polluted soil, diminution of the space of the car, reuse of materials, regulation of urban heat, long-term vision of our management, but also inclusivity and gender-neutral space. These are the few points the project wants to take with as traveling companion and hopes to make manifest at the end. So the project proposes to work with the conviction that its resources are already present on the site. And this is how we developed the design, by enhancing and recycling the element of the sites as much as possible, starting by the project of the soils. After the depollution of the ground, the cobblestone of the site will be collected, sorted, and kept with a large proportion, while a large proportion of the existing surface will be demineralized into grass and permeable soils. So the ground becomes a large sloping plain, a plaine in French, that we reorganized as a refined pattern of recycled elements, gradually following the slope and an idea of a gradient between mineral and vegetal, from gray to green, from the city to the parks. It is free from obstacles, and the space is no longer drawn by the car alone. It allows water to infiltrate and makes it visible through the introduction of landscaped elements, such as small talus and swales, so the wadis, or the nus paysagères in French. A second strategy is the one of intensifying the canopy of trees. There are around 90 trees on site that create already today a large canopy. Some are sick, some need care. And we will bring new trees. We intensify this condition of a vegetal covering by planting new trees. So we also imagine that some of them complete the more generic grid of maple tree, les érables, and some other are thought as more specific, and they will grow larger and higher. So the grid of trees is really conceived as a park for a century, a dynamic landscape that will evolve over the years. So all this becomes a renewed framework for activities to take place in. It is designed as a urban and green space, but it's not a forest, or neither completely a park. It's still a place where you can play, gather, and have a market, so have different activities, just like this image of this engraving of the Peterplatz in Basel shows it. So it's called in German, it's a Baumbestandener Lusthain. It reveals a constructed atmosphere under the trees, available for practices, fun, and activities. And so the plain in the project has to remain a space available to its inhabitants, lively and rich in activities, passages, parties. So the gradient of the soil cleverly lends itself to a variety of uses, from more intense and seasonal activities to the daily or weekly life routine, just like markets that is already taking place today. So to support some of the practices, we also add 3 small architecture, the kiosk. 2 of them enter in dialogue with the relics of the former Hôtel des Monnaies, the Munthof, and a new one is proposed in between the Parvis and the Plaine Marie-Janson. And is really intended as a reinterpretation of the type of kiosk or little folies one finds in a classical park. Altogether, they offer a roof, a seat, even a toilet, and they bring a sense of comfort and shelter in the place. So we hope that the different practices, the inhabitants, but also animals and plants will coexist well within the space of the project. As this axonometric view suggests, we hope it becomes a lively painting. And finally, this is the complete image of the project, so where you can trace back the different strategies I just explained before. The slope, slightly formatted in terraces as we climb, the canopy, the kiosk on the 3 corners of the place, small playgrounds here and there, and even a large fontaine along the Jourdan Street, marking the end of the slope and the beginning of the logistic space to welcome the trucks and the people of the market. And this diagonal that you see, that is like a shortcut that everybody takes today on the square, that we really kept because it really links the Parvis and the Plaine Marie-Janson towards the upper part of Saint-Gilles. So you also find a pedestrian green street, the actual Moscou street that leads to the Parc Paulus and to the metro station. So those are images of this street that is transformed in a more pedestrian context. And we imagine that in the end, some people will be sitting in the grass in the shade of the trees, while others will be riding bicycles and running in the fontaines in the sun. So as this project exemplify, we cultivate an interest for the existing situations and what is already there, and how we can work with this condition to intensify or bring them in our projects. So this curiosity has led us to start the documentation work of the project sites. We asked Michiel de Kleen, as a photographer, to take a careful and precise glance at all these existing contexts. So these pictures are all waiting for a transformation soon to be, either for the renovation of the public space of the Peterbospark, or in the planting of a very small garden in the dense center of Brussels, or in a public space in a small village in Wallonia, where in all this situation we are moved by this future's change of condition, the transformation of the project. So we feel the need to show the successive status of the place through the seasons, during the constructions, and after the realization. So maybe also because we are afraid sometimes to lose something from the place, but probably mostly to testify that these existing elements are the levers and the resources of our design and echoes the architecture of the city. So this is with this small reflection that we would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Guillaume, Nicolas. Before I ask my first question, I would like to maybe remind people who are watching at home that if you have any questions yourself, you can post them in the chat of our Facebook page, and then we'll try to get them answered before we end the stream. But actually, these last few slides lead me to my first question. Maybe to peel back the curtain a bit, I was able to look at the same screen that you were and saw all the slides next together in the bottom of the screen. And what struck me is that the large amount of photographs, both in the finished project as well as in the documentation of the existing site. And there are, of course, plans and axonometries but it really struck me that there's much attention to this kind of human perspective in your presentation. And I was wondering, how does this work in like the development of the project? Is this also like a key perspective or kind of a main perspective in the process of coming up with your designs?
It's a tough question. Let's say so I guess as every architect, we are interested in having the picture is an interesting object for us. The photograph is an interesting object for us because it's kind of objective and neutral. Because when we take the photograph, even us as a first visit of a site, like we showed, or when you ask a professional photographer to take pictures, when the moment stops for some time, and then on this picture you can a bit look back, and maybe that's why we also try with the work of Michiels here, that we show some glimpses. That's we told him to visit the sites, and without very explaining the project themselves, and actually he get to us with these pictures, and on the picture we even saw things that we were in the project, or that became really important on the pictures, and were also reflection on the project itself. So yeah, it's a nice medium, let's say, the photograph to have a reflection, and a broader reflection in the process of a project, and we will really like to continue this work of photograph.
Maybe that leads to another question. That is, especially in the first project that you showed, the Pocket Park, there is this real engagement with the site, but also with the people. It's really it really comes forth from a heavy investigation of the context. And I was wondering, especially in that project, how do you see your role as an architect and kind of the temporary aspect of an intervention in like two senses? Like you are involved as an architect in a certain phase of this site, but do you want to be involved afterwards also? But also in the fact that these projects show that these spaces they change, and I don't think, and it's clear that you do not make any like illusions that this is going to be the final state of this. So how do you relate to this, like the changing of these sites?
I have an answer.
If you have an answer, go.
Well, yeah, maybe that's what we'd like to. Yeah, what I think of as an answer is this: as I said, we like to give some condition to the space. Like we still think we have. You can ask yourself, and now we are with what is the role of an architect, of a landscape architect, in designing these parks of public spaces. I think we have a sort of expertise of, let's say, like a more territorial vision that we implement a lot in our project. Also some expertise about landscapes, plants or vegetation and so on. Also about the materials themselves, the water management and so on. So I think we are still, our role is still important to try to make a sort of conclusion with all this expertise we have, and to sort of do a framework that we give to the inhabitants, and then we are very we don't want it to be totally finished and polished. We want it to live, and then the people can appropriate the space like they want. So we think, I think we are kind of here to do a framework, and then the framework can be used by other people.
Yeah, I agree. But it's a very living laboratory, this project, and it's also a laboratory because we are collaborating with a lot of other colleagues and friends, Bloc Paysage, and all the people we mentioned. So it's still a moving process, and I would say our answer is also unfinished, and maybe will still evolve because the process is very long and the construction is not finished, etc. But I guess the framework is maybe a good word. So we have to fix some, to make stable some elements, and to leave some freedom for other things to happen.
And I'm just looking if there are any questions from Facebook, but if not, this will be the final question. What also struck me is that in these very different projects of very different scales, one thing that comes back is thinking in terms of cells or of not autonomous, but like different pieces to a project. I think you said at one point like the autonomy of the parts. Why is this important in the way you design?
Yeah, sometimes it's fun to have questions because maybe it's something we don't realize specifically, but yeah, I think this sentence was mentioned for the house, the kangaroo house, so which is kind of a house designed to function as a whole, but also with some housing units that can live a bit separate or autonomously. So this is how we imagine the parts that had to function separately. It's also true in the house of Serfontaine, which is also intended to live extensively when all the families there gathering as a communal place to celebrate the big moments of the year, but also should works in a lower mode when there is only the grandparents there. And so I don't know if it's important for us, but yeah, it was present in the two comments in a way.
Maybe it's still this question of framework is the same for our architectural objects. We also small devices or like the communal space, intimate space. We give this framework also to the inhabitants or the citizens, and they can appropriate the space. Maybe actually the same. This question of parts within the larger thing is maybe the same answers the personal question.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, first of all, Guillaume and Nicolas.
Thank you, Petrus.
I would also like to thank Yves for his introduction. Then I also would like to thank once again our supporters, which are the Vlaamse Overheid, Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, Brussels Capital Region, and Dieter and Imo. And last but not least, I would like to thank very much our partners in this endeavor, which are A+ Architecture in Belgium and the University of Liège. Thank you for watching, and have a good night.